Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to HK Cheating Stories. We appreciate each and every one of you joining us. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get the story started. My name is Amy, and I did something unforgivable. I had a perfect life, a loving husband, two beautiful sons, a home filled with laughter and warmth. I had everything a woman could ever want, and I threw it all away. I thought I could keep a secret. I thought I could control the fire without getting burned. But the truth always finds a way out. 19 months ago, my world shattered in an instant. Now, my husband won't even let me touch him. This is the story of how I lost everything, and how I have to live with it every single day. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who cheated on her husband. If someone had told me a few years ago that I would destroy my own marriage, that I would break the heart of the only man who ever truly loved me, I would have laughed in their face. But here I am, and I don't expect sympathy. I don't deserve it. Mark won't even let me touch him anymore. I reach for him, and he pulls away. I try to talk to him, and he just stares past me like I don't exist. Like I'm nothing. I did this. I threw away 13 years of marriage. I shattered my husband's trust, my children's sense of security, my own self-respect. For what? A few months of stolen glances, secret meetings, and a thrill that wasn't even worth it? I sit in our bedroom. Well, in what used to be our bedroom. The wedding photo on the nightstand taunts me. In it, Mark is looking at me with so much love, so much devotion. And I wonder, if I had known how this story would end, would I have still let it begin? The answer should be simple. It should be no. But the truth is, I don't know anymore. I keep thinking back to the moment it all started. The moment I made the first mistake that led me here. The night I met Ryan. It was just a regular neighborhood barbecue. The sun was setting. The air smelled of grilled meat and freshly cut grass. I remember standing by the drinks table, laughing at some joke Mark had told, feeling content in a way that made me think I had everything I'd ever need. And then I saw him. Ryan was new to the neighborhood. He was young, confident, charming. He had that kind of effortless charisma that made everyone gravitate toward him. His wife, Hannah, stood beside him, smiling sweetly as she introduced herself. She seemed nice. I remember thinking they made a beautiful couple. But when Ryan looked at me, when our eyes met across the yard, something happened. It was like an electric shock straight through my veins. A jolt of something wild, something forbidden. I should have looked away. I should have ignored the way my heart pounded in my chest, the way my stomach flipped like I was a schoolgirl with a crush. But I didn't. I smiled. And that was mistake number one. After that night, I saw Ryan everywhere. At the grocery store, at the gym, even at the car dealership where he worked. When Mark and I were shopping for a new SUV, we ran into him there. Mark liked him immediately. They talked about sports, about work, about cars. Ryan offered us a great deal, and Mark was thrilled. I remember watching them shake hands, thinking how easy this all was. I thought I could handle it. I thought it was harmless. But then came mistake number two. A few days later, I had to go back to the dealership alone to sign some paperwork. Ryan greeted me with that same easy smile, but this time, it felt different. We sat in his office, just the two of us. He leaned in slightly when he spoke, his voice lower, more personal. And then he said it. I have to be honest. I wanted to see you alone. My breath caught in my throat. Why? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Because I can't stop thinking about you. I should have laughed it off. I should have told him he was out of line. But mistake number three? I let him say it. I let myself hear it. And worst of all, I let myself feel it. That moment was the beginning of the end. At first, it was just stolen glances. A text here and there. A lingering touch that lasted a second too long. Then, one morning, when Mark left for work and the kids were at school, I drove to Ryan's house. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything. That I was just going to talk to him, to set boundaries, to make sure things didn't go too far. But the second he opened the door, the second I saw the way he was looking at me, I knew there was no turning back. I wish I could say it wasn't worth it. I wish I could say that the guilt hit me the moment it happened, that I regretted it instantly. But the truth is, at that moment, I felt alive. It wasn't love. It wasn't even real passion. It was danger. It was risk. It was something I had never allowed myself to feel before. And it cost me everything. Because 5 months later, I was caught. And now, as I sit here in this empty house, staring at the man who used to be my everything, the man who now won't even look at me, I realize the cold, hard truth. The rush, The thrill, the excitement, it all fades. But the consequences? They last forever. I wish I could tell you that was the only time it happened. That after that first mistake, I came to my senses, confessed everything, and begged for forgiveness before it was too late. But I didn't. Because the truth is, I convinced myself that I could have it all: a loving husband, a beautiful family, and a secret that would never be uncovered. I told myself it was under control, that I would stop, that I could walk away anytime I wanted. But I didn't. The first time Ryan and I were together, I felt guilt creeping at the edges of my mind, whispering warnings I refused to listen to. But the second time, the third, the fourth, the guilt became quieter. The more I lied, the easier it got. Mark would kiss me goodbye in the morning, and I'd smile at him like everything was normal. Like I wasn't driving to another man's house as soon as he left. Like I wasn't betraying him in the worst possible way. I became a different person, and I told myself it was just physical, that it didn't mean anything, that I still loved Mark, that it was just an escape, a temporary thrill I'd walk away from when I was ready. But what I didn't realize was that I was already falling, that there was no walking away when you're standing on the edge of a cliff. It wasn't love. It was never love. Ryan and I didn't talk about our future, didn't share deep emotions, didn't even pretend to be something real. He loved his wife. I loved my husband. But there was something about the way he looked at me that made me feel like I was someone else entirely. Someone reckless, someone desired, someone free. And that feeling became a drug. Every stolen moment, every whispered secret, every forbidden touch, each one made me crave more. I would go home to Mark and pretend nothing had changed. I would cook dinner, help our kids with their homework, and sleep beside my husband, all while carrying the weight of my deception. And the worst part? I had convinced myself I could keep this up forever. But nothing stays a secret forever. And the cracks in my carefully built lies started to show. I remember the first time I saw suspicion in Mark's eyes. It was subtle, just a flicker, a momentary hesitation when I told him I was going out to run errands, when in reality, I was meeting Ryan. I ignored it. I told myself he trusted me, that he would never suspect. And he didn't, at least not then. But someone else did. Ryan's wife, Hannah, wasn't stupid. She saw the way he looked at me. She noticed how he lingered when we talked, how his phone buzzed at odd hours, how he always seemed distracted. She started asking questions, watching more closely, and before I knew it, the noose was tightening around my neck. One Thursday morning, I drove to Ryan's house like I always did. I told myself it would be the last time, that after this, I would end it. But just as we were tangled in each other, lost in our own selfish world, the front door burst open. And standing there, eyes burning with rage, was Hannah's mother. I will never forget the way she looked at me, the way her face twisted in disgust as she realized what she had walked in on. She didn't scream, not at first. She just stared, shaking with fury. Then, she lunged. I barely had time to react before she was on me, her nails raking across my skin, her hands tearing at my hair. Ryan tried to pull her off, but she turned on him, slapping him so hard the sound echoed through the room. She called us names I will never repeat, told me I was a disgusting, home-wrecking whore. And she was right. I grabbed my clothes, scrambling to dress as she continued to scream, her voice shaking with betrayal. Then, just as suddenly as she arrived, she turned and stormed out. And I knew, deep in my bones, I was finished. I barely remember driving home. I was shaking so badly my hands could barely grip the wheel. My mind was racing, my heart pounding, my entire body buzzing with adrenaline and fear. How much had she seen? What would she do next? What if she told Mark? What if my entire world came crashing down before I had a chance to fix it? By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was in full panic mode. I needed to get ahead of this. I needed to tell Mark before someone else did. But when I reached for my phone to call him, I saw it. A text message from Ryan. She knows everything. My stomach dropped. I sat there, staring at those two words, as dread sank into my bones. And then, before I could even think, before I could move, a knock at the door. Loud, furious, and then another, followed by screaming. I didn't have to look. I already knew who it was. Ryan's wife. And she wasn't alone. I should have answered the door. I should have faced what was coming. But instead, I sat frozen on the couch, staring at my phone, as the walls of my perfect life started to collapse around me. And for the first time since this all began, I was truly afraid. The pounding on the door was relentless. Each knock sent a tremor through my chest, each scream from outside tightening the noose around my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, my body frozen as Ryan's wife, Hannah, and her mother shrieked my name from the other side of the door. "Open this damn door, you disgusting whore." The words sliced through me, sharp and merciless. My mind screamed at me to do something. Apologize, explain, beg, but I couldn't even get off the couch. My legs felt like lead, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might burst. I had been caught. Not just caught, exposed. And it was about to get worse. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. Silence. The kind that stretches too long, making your skin crawl. I dared to breathe, thinking, maybe they left. But then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of car doors slamming. My stomach lurched. They were leaving, yes, but not because they were giving up. They were leaving to find Mark. Panic exploded in my chest. I shot to my feet, nearly tripping as I grabbed my phone. My fingers fumbled over the screen as I tried to call him. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I switched to a text. "Mark, please come home. It's important. I need to talk to you before you hear it from someone else." The words felt hollow. Useless. Because I already knew. I was too late. I sat there for hours, my mind spiraling. I imagined Mark's face when he found out. The disbelief. The betrayal. Would he cry? Would he scream? Or worse, would he just look at me with that empty, hollow expression, the one that would tell me I had destroyed everything? I wanted to run, to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. So I sat, waiting for the inevitable. And then I heard it. A car door outside. Mark. My heart slammed against my ribs as I rushed to the mirror, wiping at my tear-streaked face, fixing my hair, as if that would make any difference now. I forced myself to walk to the front door, to stand there as the knob turned. As my husband stepped inside, the second our eyes met, I knew. He already knew. His face was unreadable. No anger. No sadness. Just cold, hard nothingness. That was somehow worse than yelling. I opened my mouth, to apologize, to explain, to say anything. But before I could speak, he stepped past me, walking straight down the hall. Not a single word. Not even a glance. Panic surged through me. "Mark, please." I reached for his arm. He jerked away so violently it was like I had burned him. "Don't," he said. One word. Flat. Emotionless. That's when I broke. I dropped to my knees right there in the hallway, sobbing, pleading, begging him to listen to me. I told him I was sorry. That it was a mistake. That I loved him. That I loved our family. That I would do anything to fix this. He just stood there, watching me crumble. Then, finally, he spoke. "You're leaving," he said. I blinked up at him, confused. "What? You're leaving? Pack your things." I shook my head frantically. "No, Mark, please. Don't do this. Please." His jaw clenched, his hands forming into fists at his sides. "Do you know where I just was?" His voice was dangerously low. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to know. I spent 3 hours at Ryan's house. My stomach turned to stone. I listened to his wife tell me everything. He continued, his voice hollow. Every single detail. Tears streamed down my face. "Mark, Stop." The finality in his voice sent an icy shiver through me. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to apologize." He exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. "You don't even get to look at me right now." I flinched. But the worst part? I deserved it. The next few hours were a blur. Mark called my mother, told her to come pick me up. When she arrived, she didn't ask questions, didn't scold me. She just looked at me with tired, disappointed eyes as she helped me pack a bag. It felt surreal, like an out-of-body experience. One moment, I had a home, a family, a husband who adored me. The next, I was a woman without a place. As I walked to the front door, my suitcase dragging behind me, I turned to Mark one last time. He didn't look at me, didn't say goodbye. And as I stepped outside into the cold night air, I knew. I was no longer his wife. I was just another mistake he'd never forgive. The car ride to my mother's house was silent. I stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur together, my mind replaying the last few hours over and over. The way Mark looked at me, or rather, the way he refused to look at me. His voice, so void of emotion it barely sounded like him. The weight of his words still hung in the air. "You don't get to explain. You don't even get to look at me right now." I closed my eyes, as if that could shut out the reality of what had just happened. But nothing could. I had lost everything. And for what? A few stolen moments with a man I didn't even love. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, trying to stop my stomach from twisting into knots. I wanted to be sick. I deserved to be sick. Beside me, my mother gripped the steering wheel, her lips pressed into a tight line. She hadn't said a word since I got into the car. She didn't have to. Her disappointment filled the space between us, suffocating me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a long, slow breath. You have no one to blame but yourself. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was tired. Like she had spent her entire life trying to raise me into a good woman, only to watch me throw it all away. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I know. She didn't reply. Because what else was there to say? When we got to her house, I went straight to my childhood bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. Everything felt surreal. Just this morning, I had woken up next to my husband. I had kissed my kids goodbye as they left for school. I had made coffee in my own kitchen, completely unaware that my world was about to shatter. Now I was here, alone, unwanted. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling as I opened my messages. I had sent Mark another text before leaving, hoping, praying, for some kind of response. Please, just tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you need me to do. Nothing. I tried again. Mark, please. Say something. Anything. Still nothing. I stared at the screen, waiting, as if I could will him to reply. But he wouldn't, and I had no right to expect him to. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had done this to myself. Now, I had to live with it. The next day, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. For a split second, my heart leaped. Mark. But when I grabbed my phone, my stomach dropped. It wasn't him. It was Hannah, Ryan's wife. I hesitated before opening the message, dread curdling in my gut. I hope you're happy, Amy. You destroyed my marriage. My kids don't have a father anymore because of you. I hope it was worth it. I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around the phone. Was she right? Had I destroyed their marriage? Or had Ryan? I wanted to tell myself that it wasn't just me, that I wasn't the only one to blame. But deep down I knew. It didn't matter who started it. It didn't matter that Ryan had made the first move, that he had been the one to confess his attraction first. I had let it happen. And now, 2 families were broken because of it. My hands shook as I typed out a response. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I truly am. I stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. It was pathetic. An apology wouldn't change anything. But what else could I do? The hours stretched into days. Mark still wouldn't talk to me. My boys were staying with him, and every night, I lay in bed wondering what he was telling them. Did they know? Had he told them what I did? I wanted to see them. I needed to see them. But Mark refused. I called. No answer. I texted. No reply. And then, finally, on the 4th night, my phone buzzed. Mark. I scrambled to grab it, my heart racing as I answered. Mark. My voice cracked. Silence. Then, finally, his voice, cold, distant. I don't know what to say to you. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears threatening to spill. I need to see you. I need to see the boys. Another long silence. Then, you can call them. Every night at 9. I exhaled shakily. Okay, thank you. I'm not doing this for you, he said. I'm doing it for them. My throat tightened. I understand. Another silence. Then his voice, quiet but firm. Amy, I want a divorce. The words knocked the breath from my lungs. Mark, please. No, he cut me off. I've made up my mind. Tears slipped down my cheeks. But we can fix this. I can fix this. A bitter laugh. You think a post-nuptial agreement will fix what you did? My breath hitched. He knew. I had spent the past few days drafting an agreement, a desperate last-ditch effort to convince him to stay. Mark sighed. I don't care about the money, Amy. I don't care about the house, or the cars, or the bank accounts. His voice lowered, and for the first time, there was something raw underneath the anger. You took something from me that I can never get back. My hands shook. What? He let out a slow, painful breath. My trust. And with that, he hung up, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my own broken heart. I sat there, staring at the dark screen of my phone, my fingers frozen around it. The weight of Mark's last words crushed me like a vice, squeezing the breath from my lungs. You took something from me that I can never get back. His trust. It didn't matter how many times I apologized. It didn't matter what I said, what I did, how much I cried or begged. Mark had already made up his mind. He wanted a divorce. And I couldn't let that happen. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. I needed a way to stop this, to make him stay. By morning, I had an idea, one last desperate attempt to hold on to my marriage. A post-nuptial agreement. I had spent the past few days researching them, but now, I was ready to put everything on the line. I would give him everything. The house, the savings, every last financial benefit I had. And in return, all I would ask for was time. Time to prove to him that I could be a good wife again. Time to make things right. Time to make him love me again. Because that was all I needed, just one last chance. I spent the next day driving from lawyer to lawyer, searching for one who could draft the agreement the way I needed it. Most of them looked at me like I was crazy. One even asked, "Are you sure you want this? You understand you're giving up almost everything." I don't care about the money. And I didn't. Mark could have it all. All I wanted was him. By the time I had the agreement finalized, Mark's lawyer had already finished the divorce papers. I was running out of time. So I did the only thing I could. I had Mark served with the post-nuptial agreement before he could serve me with divorce papers. Then I waited. That night, my phone rang. Mark. I answered so fast I nearly dropped it. Hello. My voice was breathless, desperate. Silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Finally, he spoke. You really think this will change anything? My stomach twisted. It's not about changing anything, I whispered. It's about proving to you that I'm serious. That I will never betray you again. That I want to spend the rest of my life making this up to you. Another silence. Then, a bitter laugh. You'd sign away everything? Yes. You'd let me see other women? My throat tightened. That clause had been the hardest to include. But I had. Because I needed him to know, I was willing to give him anything. If that's what you need, I said quietly, then yes. More silence. Then, for the first time since this all began, I heard something in his voice that I hadn't before. Surprise. He hadn't expected this. Maybe, just maybe, I had finally reached him. The next day, we met in person. It was the first time I had seen him since he threw me out. He looked different. Not angry. Not broken. Just empty. Like he had already grieved for our marriage. Like he had already accepted the end. Like he had already moved on. But when he sat down across from me and pulled out the post-nuptial agreement, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt. Hope. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a chance. He took his time reading it. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, my heart pounding so loudly I thought he could hear it. Finally, he looked up. This is a win for me, he said flatly. I swallowed. Yes. His jaw tensed. You're really willing to do all this? Yes. A long pause. Then, I'll sign. My breath hitched. You will. He nodded slowly. On one condition. I froze. What is it? His eyes locked onto mine, hard and unyielding. There will be no requirement for intimacy. My stomach dropped. No touching. No kissing. No hope of rekindling what we had. Not as husband and wife. Only as housemates. I should have said no. I should have fought for more. But I didn't. Because right now, this was more than I thought I would get. So I forced myself to nod. Okay. I walked out of that meeting feeling both victorious and defeated. I had saved my marriage. But I had lost my husband. At least, the way I once knew him. The man who used to hold me at night. The man who used to kiss me like I was the only woman in the world. The man who used to love me. That man was gone. And in his place was a stranger. A stranger who had agreed to stay. But only because he no longer saw me as his wife. And I would spend every single day trying to change that. Trying to earn him back. No matter how impossible it seemed. The day Mark signed the post-nuptial agreement should have felt like a victory. I should have been relieved, even grateful, that he was willing to stay, willing to give me a second chance, even if it was under the coldest of conditions. But when I walked back into our house that night, suitcase in hand, I realized something horrifying. This wasn't a second chance. It was a sentence. A punishment I had willingly accepted. Because Mark was still here, yes. But his love wasn't. For the first few weeks, I told myself that things would get better. That he just needed time. That if I was patient, if I was devoted, if I proved myself worthy again, he would start to forgive me. Start to see me again. But every day that passed chipped away at that hope. He didn't look at me. Didn't touch me. Didn't acknowledge me unless it was absolutely necessary. I was invisible in my own home. A ghost haunting the life I had ruined. Dinners were the worst. Before, We used to eat together every night as a family. Mark would tell stories, our boys would laugh, and I would sit beside him, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. Now he refused to eat anything I cooked. He started grilling his own food on weekends, cooking separate meals during the week. When we sat at the table with our kids, he acted as if I wasn't there. If our sons asked him something, he'd respond with warmth. If they spoke to me, he remained silent, chewing slowly, never lifting his gaze from his plate, as if the sound of my voice didn't exist. I started dreading every mealtime, forcing myself to swallow food that tasted like shame. The nights were even lonelier. I used to fall asleep wrapped in his arms, safe, secure, loved. Now, we slept in the same room but in separate beds, as if a physical wall had been placed between us. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, wondering if he was awake too, wondering if he ever thought about us, wondering if he still saw me as the woman he once loved, or if he only saw the traitor who had shattered his heart. There were moments, small glimpses, when I thought maybe, just maybe, I was getting through to him. Like when I reached out one night, brushing my fingers against his hand, and he didn't immediately pull away. For a second, just a fleeting moment, I thought he might turn toward me. But instead, he stiffened. And then he got up and left the room. I heard the lock click behind him. I curled into myself, biting down on my lip so hard it nearly bled. I didn't cry. Not that night. Because I realized something in that moment. Something I had refused to see before. Mark wasn't punishing me. He was protecting himself. From me. It wasn't just at home. Mark refused to be seen with me in public. He stopped going to family gatherings if I was there. If our boys had a school event, we took turns attending, never going together. When it was my turn, he'd show up anyway, but he wouldn't sit with me. Instead, he'd stand at the sidelines, talking to the other dads, acting like I didn't exist. The whispers started. The looks. Our neighbors knew. Our friends knew. And they judged me for it. Some were polite, smiling tightly when they saw me. Others didn't bother to hide their disgust. I had lost all of my friendships. And I knew why. Because I was the woman who broke her husband. And no one wanted to be around that. The only time Mark and I were together, truly together, was when we traveled. Vacations were different. For the sake of our kids, he pretended. We went on trips as a family. We took pictures, we smiled, we played the part. For a few days, I could almost convince myself that things were normal again. Almost. But then night would come, and reality would set in. Because even in a hotel room, even when it was just the two of us, he still kept his distance. He would book 2 separate rooms, one for him and the boys, one for me. And even when we were alone, even when the warmth of the day still lingered between us, he never crossed that line. No touches, no kisses, not even a glance. The distance was a chasm I couldn't cross, and I was starting to fear that I never would. One night, after we got back from a trip, I finally said it. Let's move. Mark barely looked up from his book. What? Let's leave this neighborhood. Start fresh somewhere else. He let out a short, humorless laugh. You think moving will fix this? No, I whispered. But maybe it'll help. Mark set the book down and exhaled slowly. I'll only move if my job requires it, he said. Otherwise, I'm staying here until the boys finish high school. I swallowed hard. But they like it here. And so do I. The finality in his voice made my stomach twist. I knew the real reason he wanted to stay. Ryan's ex-wife, Hannah, and their kids still lived down the street. So did everyone else who knew what I had done. This was my prison. And Mark had no intention of letting me escape it. I wanted to tell him how much it hurt. How much it killed me to live like this. To be married to a man who no longer saw me as his wife. But I didn't. Because what right did I have to complain? This was the life I chose. Or rather, the life I destroyed. And now, I had to live in the ruins. No matter how much it broke me. I never thought I'd be the one to leave. Not after everything I had done. Not after I had begged for this second chance, signing away my rights, my dignity, everything. Just for the privilege of staying by Mark's side. But I was suffocating. Living in that house, pretending we were still a family, watching him avoid my touch, my presence, my existence, it was unbearable. So, for the first time since this nightmare began, I made a choice. I packed my bags. And I left. I told Mark my decision on a cold Sunday morning. The boys were still asleep. The house was quiet, except for the distant hum of the heater. He was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through the newspaper like it mattered, like there wasn't a war raging in the space between us. "I'm moving out," I said. I expected him to react. A flicker of surprise, maybe even relief. But he just turned the page, as if I hadn't spoken at all. I swallowed, gripping the back of the chair across from him. "I found a place close by, fully furnished. I signed the lease already." Still nothing. I felt my breath hitch, my chest tightening. "Mark, say something." Finally, he looked up. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something dark and tired. "You're doing this for me, or for yourself?" I flinched, because we both knew the answer. That evening, I left with nothing but 2 suitcases and a hollow ache in my chest. Mark didn't offer to help, didn't say goodbye, didn't even look up from his book when I walked past him. The boys weren't home. He had taken them out for the day, making sure they weren't there to see me go. I should have been grateful for that. Instead, it felt like another wound. Another reminder that, despite the paper that still called us husband and wife, I had already been erased from his life. The apartment was small but comfortable. It didn't feel like home, but at least it didn't feel like prison. At first, the silence was unbearable. I missed the sound of the boys laughing, of Mark moving around the house, of the life I had once had. But as the days passed, I started to feel lighter, like I could breathe again, like I wasn't constantly drowning in my own regret. I still saw my boys every day. They came over after school, had dinner with me, even stayed the night a few times a week. Mark and I coordinated it without speaking much. Everything was handled through short, clipped texts. No small talk, no emotions, just logistics. And yet, something was different. Because now, he was the one calling me. At first, it was about the boys. Then, it was small things, questions that didn't really need to be asked. Then, it was nothing at all. Just silence on the other end of the phone. Like he wanted to say something, but didn't know how. Like he wasn't ready to let me go. The first time I saw him after moving out, I could tell something had shifted. He looked conflicted, less guarded, less distant. We talked, really talked, for the first time in months. It wasn't about the affair. It wasn't about what had happened. It was just us. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was working. That space had given us what we needed. That we could find our way back to each other. But then, just when I let myself hope, Mark shattered it. It happened on a rainy Friday night. I had just put the boys to bed when my phone rang. "Mark." I answered quickly, heart racing. Hey, he said softly. I heard the hesitation in his voice, the weight of something unspoken. Then, finally, "Amy, I want a divorce." The words slammed into me like a blow to the chest. I gripped the counter, my legs going weak. "Mark, no," I whispered. "Please. We're getting better. I know you feel it too." He let out a slow, shaky breath. "I do," he admitted. "And that's why we need to do this." Tears burned behind my eyes. "I don't understand." "It's psychological," he said, his voice tight. "As long as we're married, I can't let go of what you did. I can't move past it. I need to end this to have a chance at forgiving you." I shook my head. "No, Mark, that doesn't make sense. We can work through this. I still love you, Amy," he interrupted. I froze. My heart stopped. Then why? Why was he doing this? "But I can't love you as my wife anymore," he finished. And just like that, my world crumbled all over again. We met a week later to discuss the divorce. I was prepared to fight, to tell him that I wouldn't sign, that I'd keep fighting for us. But when I saw him, really saw him, I knew. He was already gone. So I did the only thing I could. I let him go. The night the divorce was finalized, Mark called me. "Let's have dinner," he said, to say goodbye properly. I hesitated, my heart breaking all over again. "Mark, I don't know if I can do that." "Please," he said quietly. So I went. And for one last night, we laughed. We talked. We pretended that we weren't two people who had destroyed each other. When we left the restaurant, he walked me to my car. For a long moment, we just stood there, the rain falling softly around us. Then, before I could stop myself, I whispered, "Do you think we'll ever find our way back to each other?" Mark smiled sadly. "Maybe," he said. Then, he leaned in. Just a fraction, just enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath. For a second, I thought he might kiss me. But instead, he reached up, tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, and walked away, leaving me standing there, alone in the rain. And for the first time, I knew. This was really the end. The night Mark walked away for the last time, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring blankly at the windshield as the rain poured down. I didn't cry. I had already cried too much. Instead, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the weight of everything I had lost pressed down on me like a stone. It was over. The marriage. The second chance. The desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he would change his mind. There was nothing left to fight for. Mark was gone, and I had no one to blame but myself. In the weeks that followed, I tried to adjust to my new life. No more late-night phone calls. No more seeing his truck in the driveway, knowing he was inside but refusing to come near me. No more painful silences, no more empty stares. Just nothing. And somehow, the nothingness was worse. Because even when Mark had ignored me, he had still been there. Now he wasn't. And I had to face the terrifying truth. I was alone. The boys adjusted faster than I expected. At first, I was terrified that they would hate me. That Mark had told them everything. That they would look at me with the same quiet disappointment that my mother did. But he hadn't told them. He had protected them from the truth, shielding them from the ugliness of what I had done. For that, I was grateful. I didn't deserve his kindness, but I held on to it like a lifeline. Because at least it meant he still cared, even if it wasn't in the way I wanted. One afternoon, I drove by our old house. It wasn't intentional. I had been running errands, and my car had simply turned in that direction, like muscle memory. When I saw it, my chest tightened. It looked the same. The porch light was on. The grass was neatly trimmed. It was still home, but I wasn't part of it anymore. Mark's truck was parked in the driveway, and for a brief, aching moment, I imagined knocking on the door. Imagined him opening it, looking at me not with indifference, but with something else. Something warm. Something real. But that was a fantasy, and I had spent too much time living in fantasies. So I drove away. The divorce settlement was finalized a few weeks later. I let Mark keep everything. The house, the cars, the savings. I didn't ask for alimony. I didn't ask for child support. Some people told me I was stupid, that I should have fought for what was legally mine. But I didn't care about the money. I never had. All I had wanted was him. And I had lost him long before the divorce papers were signed. So what was the point of fighting? In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I got a job. Something simple, something steady. I made new friends. People who didn't know me as Mark's wife. People who didn't know what I had done. For the first time in years, I was truly independent. But independence felt more like isolation. Because no matter where I went, no matter who I was with, there was always something missing. And that something was him. One evening, I got a text from Mark. It was short. Simple. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could have poured my heart out. Told him I wasn't okay. Told him I still loved him. Told him I would give anything for another chance. But I didn't. Instead, I typed back, "You too." And that was it. Because that was all that was left of us. 2 words. 2 strangers pretending to be okay. Sometimes, I wonder if Mark ever thinks about me. If he ever lies awake at night, remembering the way things used to be. If he ever wonders what might have happened if I had made a different choice. But wondering won't change the past. And the past is all I have left. I live with my regret. I carry it with me every single day. And if I could offer one piece of advice to anyone listening, anyone standing on the edge of the same mistake I made, it would be this. Don't do it. Don't throw away something real for something temporary. Because the thrill of the affair, it fades. But the consequences, they last forever. If I could go back in time, I would grab my past self by the shoulders and shake some sense into her. I would tell her that no thrill is worth the price of betrayal. That the rush of secrecy, the stolen moments, the excitement of something new, it all fades. And when it does, you're left standing in the wreckage of your own choices, wondering how you could have been so blind. I lost my husband, not because he stopped loving me, but because he could no longer trust me. And trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. I lost my family, my home, my community. I became an outsider in my own life, all because I let temptation cloud my judgment. So if you're listening, if you're standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything, step back. Protect what matters. Love isn't about momentary passion. It's about commitment, about choosing the same person over and over, even when it's hard. Because when you break something precious, no amount of regret can put it back together the same way. I learned that too late. I hope you don't have to.